Tonight, we're exploring 100 relaxing facts and strange mysteries about the Amazon rainforest. From ancient creatures and hidden rivers to mysterious sounds echoing deep in the jungle after dark. Before we begin, leave a comment letting me know what city you're watching from tonight. And if you enjoy documentaries like this, don't forget to subscribe to Sleepy Secrets. If there's another topic filled with relaxing facts you'd like me to explore next, let me know in the comments below. Sleep well and enjoy tonight's journey. Long before the Amazon became the largest rainforest on Earth, before the endless rivers, the heavy green canopy, or the strange cries hidden inside the darkness, this part of South America may have looked almost unrecognizable. The world itself was different then. The continents were arranged in unfamiliar shapes. Giant inland seas covered huge portions of the land, and what would eventually become the Amazon was not yet a rainforest at all, but a shifting world of water, mud, ancient wetlands, and enormous geological forces quietly building something that would one day influence the climate of an entire planet. Tonight, as rain falls softly across the canopy and millions of leaves release moisture into the warm night air, it is difficult to imagine that this forest may owe its existence to events that began tens of millions of years ago, deep beneath oceans and mountains that no longer exist in the same form today. One of the strangest possibilities about the Amazon is that parts of it may once have been connected to a giant inland sea. Fossils of marine animals have been discovered far from the Atlantic coast, buried deep inside areas now covered by jungle. Ancient sediments suggest that salt water may have pushed far inland during certain periods of Earth's history, creating enormous, swampy ecosystems where river systems had not yet fully formed. Some scientists believe portions of the western Amazon were once dominated by a massive wetland system called the Pebas system, an enormous maze of shallow lakes, flooded forests, mudflats, and slow-moving water unlike anything alive today. In that ancient world, giant crocodile relatives, longer than buses, moved silently through dark water. Massive turtles drifted through swamps thick with primitive vegetation. Strange river dolphins evolved in isolation. And because the region remained flooded for extremely long periods, evolution itself may have moved differently there, allowing species to adapt in ways still not fully understood. What makes the Amazon unusual is not only its size, but how improbable its existence may actually be. The rainforest depends on water constantly recycling through the air. Moisture rises from trees, forms clouds, falls again as rain, and repeats the process over and over. Some scientists estimate a single large tree can release hundreds of gallons of water vapor into the atmosphere every day. Multiply that by hundreds of billions of trees, and the Amazon begins behaving less like a forest and more like a living weather engine. But that engine may never have formed without the Andes Mountains. Millions of years ago, Western South America looked dramatically different. Before the Andes fully rose, much of the continent drained in entirely different directions. There is evidence suggesting parts of the Proto-Amazon may once have flowed westward toward the Pacific Ocean, rather than eastward into the Atlantic. Then, slowly, Almost imperceptibly across geological time, the Andes began rising as tectonic plates collided beneath the continent. Those mountains changed everything. As the Andes grew taller, they blocked ancient drainage systems and forced water eastward. Sediments pouring down from the mountains fed enormous river networks. Vast floodplains formed. Nutrients spread across lowlands. The Amazon River gradually emerged from these transformations, becoming one of the most powerful freshwater systems on Earth. Even today, the Andes continue shaping the rainforest from thousands of miles away. Much of the water feeding the Amazon still begins high in those distant mountains, where melting snow and rainfall eventually travel into jungle rivers that twist through nearly the entire continent. And yet, despite all this water, one of the greatest mysteries of the Amazon lies beneath the trees themselves. The soil here is surprisingly poor. At first, that seems impossible. How could the richest ecosystem on Earth grow from nutrient-poor ground? In many places, Amazonian soil is thin, heavily weathered, and stripped of minerals by millions of years of rain. If the forest disappears, the nutrients vanish with it astonishingly fast. Unlike fertile farmland elsewhere in the world, much of the Amazon stores its life above the ground, not below it. The forest survives because it wastes almost nothing. Leaves fall and decompose rapidly in the heat and humidity. Insects, fungi, microbes, and roots recycle nutrients almost immediately. Death becomes food within days, sometimes within hours. The jungle operates through an enormous biological efficiency that feels almost difficult to comprehend. Every fallen branch, every dead insect, every layer of rotting vegetation is reused by something else. It is a system so tightly connected that removing one layer can begin affecting countless others. And hidden among these poor soils lies one of the Amazon's most fascinating mysteries. Scattered across parts of the rainforest are patches of unusually dark, fertile earth known as terra preta, black earth in Portuguese. Unlike surrounding soils, these areas contain high concentrations of charcoal, organic matter, pottery fragments, and nutrients. Some remain fertile centuries after their creation. Many researchers believe they were intentionally engineered by ancient humans. If true, it changes the way the Amazon's past is understood. For a long time, outsiders imagined the rainforest as an untouched wilderness where large human civilizations could never fully develop. Dense jungle, poor soil, difficult farming. It all seemed too hostile for major societies. But discoveries over the last few decades have complicated that assumption. Archaeologists using LiDAR technology have uncovered geometric earthworks, ancient settlements, hidden road systems, and evidence of surprisingly organized populations beneath parts of the forest canopy. Some researchers now believe portions of the Amazon may once have supported millions of people before European diseases devastated indigenous populations after contact. Not everyone agrees on the scale of these societies. Debate continues. But the evidence increasingly suggests the Amazon was not simply empty wilderness before colonial arrival. In many areas, humans may have shaped the forest itself for thousands of years. Certain tree species appear unusually concentrated near ancient settlement zones, raising the possibility that parts of the rainforest were intentionally managed like vast engineered gardens. Fruit trees, medicinal plants, useful palms, all potentially encouraged generation after generation until the distinction between natural forest and human-shaped forest became blurred. And that idea changes the emotional feeling of the Amazon entirely, because suddenly the forest stops looking like a place untouched by humanity and begins looking more like a forgotten collaboration between nature and civilization. Even the river itself feels almost too enormous to fully understand. The Amazon River carries more water than the next several largest rivers combined. During the rainy season, sections can expand so dramatically that entire forests disappear underwater for months. Trees stand submerged in dark water while fish swim through branches high above the normal forest floor. In some flooded regions, aquatic life disperses into the canopy itself, feeding on fruits and seeds among drowned trunks. And beneath those waters, the river continues reshaping the landscape constantly. Entire islands appear and vanish. Riverbanks collapse overnight. Channels migrate across miles over centuries. From space, the Amazon basin resembles a living circulatory system, endlessly moving sediment, nutrients, organisms, and water through the continent. But perhaps the most unsettling thing about the Amazon is how much remains uncertain. Even now, scientists continue discovering new species there every year: fish, insects, amphibians, fungi, plants, and microorganisms never previously documented. In some places, the density of life is so overwhelming that a single acre can contain more tree species than entire regions of North America. And yet, large portions remain difficult to study. Dense canopy blocks satellite visibility. Flood cycles isolate remote regions. Many organisms appear only seasonally or exist in tiny, localized habitats. Some species may disappear before they are even identified. Others may have evolved relationships so specialized that scientists still struggle to explain how they survive. There are trees that depend on one specific animal to spread their seeds. Ant colonies that defend entire forests of plants. Fungi that manipulate insect behavior in ways that almost feel unreal. Vines that climb toward sunlight while slowly strangling the trees supporting them. Tiny frogs carrying toxins powerful enough to stop predators instantly. Every layer of the Amazon seems connected to another layer hidden beneath it. And through all of this complexity, the forest continues breathing. At night, warm mist rises through the canopy. Insects pulse through the darkness like invisible machinery. Rain begins somewhere distant, moving slowly across the leaves. Rivers continue carrying sediments from mountains formed millions of years ago. Roots spread through ancient soil, shaped by both geology and forgotten human hands. The Amazon often feels eternal when viewed from above, endless green stretching beyond the horizon. But its existence may depend on balances far more fragile than they first appear. Scientists still debate exactly how resilient the rainforest truly is. Some believe the system can recover from enormous disruption over time. Others warn that certain tipping points could permanently alter rainfall cycles across large portions of the basin. Because the Amazon does not merely react to climate, it actively helps create it. And perhaps that is what makes this forest feel so mysterious. It is not simply a place where life exists. It is a place where water, air, mountains, rivers, soil, plants, animals, and even ancient civilizations may all have shaped one another continuously for millions of years, creating something so vast and interconnected that no single perspective fully explains it. The deeper scientists look into the Amazon's origins, the less it resembles a simple rainforest, and the more it begins to resemble an entire living system woven slowly across deep time itself. By the time darkness settles across the Amazon, the forest no longer feels entirely like Earth. The air grows heavier. Mist begins forming above black water rivers. Leaves glisten under faint moonlight filtering through layers of canopy so dense that in some places almost no wind reaches the ground. And somewhere, far beyond visibility, hidden among roots, branches, flooded forests, and slow-moving currents, millions of living creatures begin moving at once. Some are ancient, some remain barely understood, and some seem so strange that early explorers believed the rainforest itself was trying to deceive them. One of the reasons the Amazon feels different from almost anywhere else on Earth is because evolution here rarely had simple conditions. Rivers constantly shifted course. Flooded forests isolated populations for thousands of years. Entire habitats became separated by water, darkness, swamps, or dense vegetation. Over immense stretches of time, animals adapted to these fragmented worlds in remarkably specialized ways, sometimes producing species that exist nowhere else. Even now, scientists continue discovering new life in the Amazon basin every year. Not fossils, not extinct creatures, living animals, new frogs, new fish, new insects, new reptiles, sometimes hidden only a few miles away from places humans already study. The scale of biodiversity here is so overwhelming that researchers often describe the rainforest less as a finished ecosystem and more as an ongoing biological experiment that never truly stopped evolving. And perhaps no creature captures the strange atmosphere of the Amazon more than the pink river dolphin. At first glance, it barely seems real. Unlike ocean dolphins, Amazon river dolphins move through muddy freshwater channels hidden beneath rainforest canopies. Their bodies appear pale gray when young, but many slowly develop soft pink coloration as they age, especially males. Some scientists believe the color becomes more visible through scar tissue caused by rough interactions between rivals in flooded forests and narrow river systems. But what makes them especially unusual is the way they move. Ocean dolphins are streamlined for open water. Amazon river dolphins are not. Their neck vertebrae allow them to turn their heads independently, helping them navigate submerged tree branches during flood seasons when entire forests disappear underwater. They swim through drowned canopies, where fish scatter among trunks and roots, almost as if the dolphins themselves evolved specifically for a world where rivers and forests became temporarily fused together. For centuries, local legends described them as intelligent shapeshifters capable of becoming human at night. Those stories may sound supernatural now, but they reveal something important about the emotional effect Amazon wildlife has always had on people. The forest often produces animals so unfamiliar that they seem to blur the line between biology and myth. And deeper in the rainforest, another creature moves with almost the opposite energy. The sloth appears less like an animal surviving in the wild and more like something suspended outside normal time. Everything about its behavior seems slow, deliberate, almost strangely calm. Some sloths move so little that algae begin growing directly on their fur, giving them a greenish tint that helps camouflage them among branches. Entire microscopic ecosystems can live inside that fur. Insects, fungi, moths, microorganisms, creating the unsettling impression that even the animal itself has become a moving piece of rainforest. Their slowness is not laziness. It is survival. Leaves provide very little energy, so sloths evolved to conserve almost everything possible. Their digestion can take days, sometimes weeks. They descend from trees rarely, exposing themselves to predators whenever they do. And despite appearing harmless, their long, curved claws can become surprisingly dangerous when threatened. What makes creatures like sloths fascinating is not simply their appearance, but how completely they embody the logic of the rainforest itself. In the Amazon, survival often favors efficiency over speed. Elsewhere in the forest, however, evolution followed a far more violent path. The jaguar moves through the Amazon with such silence that many prey animals never realize danger is near until the attack has already begun. Unlike many large cats, jaguars are powerful swimmers and frequently hunt near rivers and flooded terrain. Their bite force is among the strongest relative to body size of any big cat alive today, strong enough to pierce turtle shells and crush skulls directly. Yet jaguars remain surprisingly difficult to see. Camera traps often capture only brief, ghost-like appearances. A patterned body emerging from darkness for seconds before vanishing again. Indigenous stories sometimes describe jaguars less as animals and more as intelligent presences watching from the forest itself. And perhaps that feeling comes from a deeper truth about the Amazon. Most of the rainforest remains hidden most of the time. Even large predators disappear easily beneath the canopy. Visibility shrinks. Sound travels strangely. Distances become difficult to judge. Humans are not naturally designed for this environment, and the forest constantly reminds visitors of that fact. Nowhere is that clearer than with the bullet ant. The insect itself is not especially large compared to many Amazonian species, but its sting has become legendary among entomologists and indigenous communities alike. Some researchers describe the pain as among the most intense insect stings known to science. Burning, electrical, overwhelming, sometimes lasting for hours. Yet even creatures this feared play precise ecological roles. Bullet ants help aerate soil, recycle organic matter, and participate in relationships with plants and microorganisms that maintain rainforest systems. In the Amazon, almost nothing exists independently. Every organism becomes part of larger networks hidden beneath what first appears chaotic. And occasionally, those networks produce creatures so efficient that humans struggle not to exaggerate them into monsters. Piranhas are a perfect example. Popular culture transformed them into symbols of instant violence. Rivers boiling with flesh-eating fish, stripping animals to bone within seconds. Reality is more complicated. Most piranha species are cautious omnivores or scavengers that feed opportunistically. While bites certainly happen, large feeding frenzies are relatively uncommon and often connected to unusual environmental conditions like drought, trapped prey, or food scarcity. Still, the myths survived for a reason. In muddy Amazon waters, where visibility disappears almost immediately, imagination fills the gaps. The unknown becomes larger than reality. And the rainforest has always encouraged that psychological effect, especially underwater, because beneath the rivers lives one of the Amazon's most physically overwhelming predators, the green anaconda. Stories about giant snakes in South America date back centuries. Some are clearly exaggerated. Others remain difficult to verify completely. But even confirmed specimens can reach astonishing sizes. Thick-bodied, muscular, nearly silent in water, anacondas evolved for ambush rather than pursuit. What unsettles many people is how easily they disappear. In dark swamps or flooded vegetation, the snake's body blends almost perfectly into reflections, roots, and floating debris. Much of the Amazon operates through concealment rather than confrontation. Animals survive by remaining unseen until the exact moment movement becomes necessary. And yet, despite all these predators, some of the rainforest's most dangerous organisms are incredibly small. Poison dart frogs shimmer in impossible colors across wet leaves: electric blue, yellow, orange, green. Their brightness acts as warning rather than camouflage. Certain species carry toxins powerful enough to stop predators almost instantly. Indigenous groups historically used toxins from some frogs for hunting darts, though not every brightly colored species is equally dangerous. Scientists still debate aspects of how these toxins evolved so effectively. Some evidence suggests the frogs accumulate chemicals through their diet, particularly certain ants and insects. Remove those dietary sources in captivity, and toxicity may decline dramatically, which means even the poison itself may ultimately come from the rainforest as a whole. That idea appears again and again in the Amazon. No creature survives entirely alone. The forest shapes everything. Certain fish rely on flooded fruit trees. Trees rely on animals spreading seeds. Fungi alter insect behavior. Ant colonies defend plants in exchange for shelter. Bats pollinate flowers that bloom only at night. Some orchids evolved shapes that appear almost designed for specific pollinators alone. And because these relationships developed over immense periods of isolation and adaptation, many Amazonian species seem almost impossibly specialized. Perhaps that is why the rainforest still feels unfinished in scientific terms. Researchers estimate millions of species may exist in the Amazon basin, many still undocumented. Insects alone could represent enormous unknown worlds of biological diversity. Tiny canopy habitats high above the forest floor remain difficult to study. Deep river systems conceal organisms rarely observed directly. Seasonal floods transform ecosystems so dramatically that entire communities of life appear and disappear depending on water levels. Even now, the Amazon continues producing biological surprises. Fish capable of breathing air temporarily. Electric eels, powerful enough to stun large animals. Transparent frogs whose organs are visible through their skin. Tiny monkeys adapted to narrow ecological niches. Fungi that infect insects and slowly alter their behavior in ways that sound almost fictional. And somewhere beyond current scientific maps, there are almost certainly species humans have never seen. Not hidden in fantasy worlds, hidden in real forests, waiting beneath leaves, inside flooded roots, or high above the canopy where few researchers ever reach. That possibility changes the emotional atmosphere of the Amazon entirely, because unlike many parts of the modern world, this rainforest still carries genuine uncertainty. Not every system has been fully catalogued. Not every animal has been classified. Not every interaction has been understood. The deeper scientists explore, the more complicated the rainforest becomes. And perhaps that complexity explains why the Amazon often feels less like a location and more like a separate living world operating beside our own, filled with creatures shaped by millions of years of isolation, competition, adaptation, flood cycles, darkness, heat, and survival. A world where pink dolphins move through drowned forests, where silent jaguars vanish into shadows, where rivers hide electric predators beneath black water, where tiny frogs carry toxins powerful enough to stop hearts, and where, even tonight, somewhere inside the largest rainforest on Earth, something unknown may still be moving quietly through the dark. When night finally settles over the Amazon, the forest does not become quieter, it becomes louder. Not gradually, not gently, almost all at once. As sunlight disappears behind the canopy, the rainforest seems to awaken into an entirely different world. One built less around visibility and more around sound. The heat of the day lingers beneath the trees. Moisture hangs thick in the air. Black rivers reflect fragments of moonlight through drifting mist. And then, from somewhere deep inside the darkness, the first calls begin. A distant howl, a sharp metallic chirp, the slow pulse of insects vibrating through leaves, water moving against submerged roots, something splashing far beyond sight. And within minutes, the entire forest transforms into a layered wall of noise, so dense that early explorers often described it as overwhelming, almost unreal, like standing inside a machine too large to fully understand. One of the strangest truths about the Amazon is that nighttime may actually be more biologically active than daytime. Many animals avoid the brutal daytime heat by moving after sunset. Predators begin hunting. Amphibians emerge from hidden shelters. Insects fill the humid air in enormous numbers. Even plants and fungi respond differently once temperatures cool and moisture shifts. What humans hear at night is not random chaos, but millions of organisms operating simultaneously inside overlapping systems of survival, communication, warning, attraction, territory, and navigation. And because visibility becomes so limited beneath the canopy, sound often replaces sight entirely. For many Amazonian species, hearing is more valuable than seeing. That changes the emotional atmosphere of the forest completely. In most modern environments, humans trust their eyes first. In the Amazon at night, that instinct quickly begins to fail. Darkness compresses distance. Shapes disappear. The forest floor becomes difficult to navigate. Dense vegetation blocks moonlight. Sometimes you hear movement only a few feet away and still cannot identify its source. And that uncertainty may explain why the sounds of the rainforest affect people so deeply. The human brain constantly tries to interpret unfamiliar noises. It searches for patterns. It attempts to identify threats. But the Amazon produces sounds unlike almost anywhere else on Earth, and many of them feel strangely difficult to place emotionally. Some seem mechanical, others almost human. Some resemble distant alarms, whistles, cries, or breathing. And occasionally, the forest produces sounds that even experienced researchers struggle to identify immediately. One of the most powerful nighttime voices belongs to the howler monkey. Long before dawn, their calls can travel for miles through dense rainforest. The sound is so deep and resonant that first-time listeners sometimes mistake it for large predators or distant machinery. Specialized throat structures amplify their vocalizations into low-frequency roars, capable of moving through thick vegetation remarkably efficiently. But the purpose of those calls is not violence. In many cases, the monkeys are trying to avoid conflict altogether. By broadcasting territorial warnings across large distances, groups reduce the need for dangerous physical confrontations. Sound becomes a way to organize space inside an environment where direct visibility is extremely limited. And the Amazon is filled with species that evolved similar solutions. Some frogs call from hidden pools high in trees. Certain insects communicate through vibrations traveling across bark or leaves rather than through open air. Birds signal through short bursts, carefully adapted to cut through dense vegetation without revealing their precise location to predators. Even rain itself changes the acoustic structure of the forest. During heavy storms, countless smaller sounds disappear beneath the impact of water striking leaves and branches. Predators may lose auditory advantages. Certain species temporarily reduce movement. Others become more active, using the noise cover to travel undetected. The rainforest is not only alive at night, it is constantly listening. Perhaps nowhere is that more apparent than among the insects. To human ears, the nighttime Amazon often sounds dominated by a single endless layer of buzzing or chirping. But researchers studying rainforest acoustics discovered something far more organized hidden inside that apparent noise. Different insect species frequently occupy distinct sound frequencies, almost like musicians avoiding overlap inside an orchestra. Without that separation, communication would become nearly impossible. Certain cicadas produce high-pitched pulses, while katydids occupy different acoustic ranges. Crickets establish rhythmic intervals that reduce interference. Some species synchronize collectively, creating waves of sound that ripple through entire sections of forest simultaneously. The effect can feel strangely hypnotic. At times, the jungle seems to breathe through sound alone. Then, suddenly, everything stops. For a few brief seconds, the entire forest may fall nearly silent. And those moments often feel more unsettling than the noise itself. Scientists are still studying why these synchronized pauses occur. In some cases, predators may trigger temporary silence as prey animals freeze or reduce activity. Environmental shifts may also play a role, but inside the darkness, the effect feels almost unnatural, as though the rainforest itself has paused to listen for something moving nearby. Then the sounds begin again, slowly at first, a chirp, a rustle, a distant call, and within moments, the full nighttime orchestra returns. Among the most unusual nighttime hunters in the Amazon are bats. The rainforest contains astonishing bat diversity, with species adapted for dramatically different lifestyles. Some feed on insects, others pollinate flowers. Some disperse seeds across enormous distances, helping maintain the forest itself. A few even evolved heat sensors capable of detecting blood flow beneath animal skin. But what makes bats especially fascinating is the invisible world they navigate through echolocation. While humans stumble through darkness almost blind, bats construct acoustic maps using reflected sound waves. Every object becomes information. Branches, insects, water surfaces, leaves, moving animals, all translated into spatial awareness through rapid pulses beyond human hearing. In a way, bats experience a version of the rainforest fundamentally different from our own. Not visually, but acoustically, and perhaps the Amazon itself operates more through sound than humans naturally realize. Researchers using advanced recording systems discovered that entire sections of rainforest produce recognizable acoustic signatures depending on ecosystem health. Healthy forests often generate dense, layered soundscapes filled with biological activity across many frequencies. Damaged areas sometimes become quieter in measurable ways long before visual destruction appears obvious. The rainforest can almost be monitored by listening to it. That idea changes the emotional meaning of sound entirely, because suddenly the nighttime noise is no longer background atmosphere. It becomes evidence of countless systems functioning together at once. And hidden within those systems are animals so strange that their calls barely seem connected to recognizable creatures. Certain Amazonian birds produce sounds resembling electronic tones, metallic clicks, dripping water, or mechanical alarms. The screaming piha, for example, emits one of the loudest bird calls in the rainforest, a sharp, piercing cry that echoes repeatedly through humid air with startling intensity. Other birds evolved mimicry abilities so advanced that they can imitate surrounding species, environmental noises, or rhythmic patterns almost perfectly. Scientists still debate the full evolutionary advantages of some of these behaviors: attraction, territory, confusion, predator avoidance, possibly combinations of all of them. The deeper researchers study rainforest acoustics, the more complex the communication systems appear. And then there are the sounds nobody fully explains easily. Explorers throughout history described hearing distant cries, rhythmic knocks, strange whistles, or low-frequency vibrations moving through the forest at night without obvious sources. Many eventually received ordinary explanations: animals, falling branches, water movement, atmospheric distortion. Yet some reports remain ambiguous, simply because the rainforest itself distorts perception so effectively. Humidity bends sound. Dense vegetation reflects it unpredictably. Water carries noise enormous distances. An animal hundreds of yards away may sound strangely close. Something nearby may become almost impossible to locate precisely. The forest constantly manipulates human perception through acoustics alone. That may partially explain why indigenous cultures across the Amazon often developed deep spiritual relationships with sound itself. For many communities, the rainforest was never silent wilderness. It was a living network of voices carrying information about weather, danger, movement, seasons, animals, and unseen forces. Skilled hunters learned to interpret subtle shifts in bird activity or insect rhythms. Some could detect approaching rain long before storms arrived, simply by changes in forest behavior. Even today, experienced local guides sometimes identify dozens of species entirely by sound before sunrise. Not because they see them, because the forest announces itself constantly to those who understand how to listen. And perhaps that is what makes the Amazon at night feel so powerful emotionally. It forces humans into a position we rarely experience anymore: uncertainty. You cannot fully see your surroundings. You cannot identify every sound. You cannot easily predict what is moving beyond the trees. Modern life conditions people to control environments through light, visibility, and constant information. The Amazon removes much of that control almost immediately after dark, and in doing so, it reveals something older. A reminder that for most of human history, night itself was once mysterious. The rainforest preserves that feeling, not through fantasy or superstition, but through overwhelming biological complexity operating largely beyond human senses. Because somewhere beyond the next layer of darkness, frogs continue calling from flooded branches. Insects vibrate through wet leaves. Bats map invisible pathways overhead. Howler monkeys send territorial warnings through miles of jungle. Predators move silently near riverbanks. Rain begins falling somewhere deep inside the canopy. And all across the Amazon tonight, millions of living creatures continue speaking into the darkness, in languages the forest has been developing for millions of years. For centuries, outsiders looked at the Amazon and assumed almost nobody could truly live there. The rainforest appeared too dense, too wet, too unpredictable. Rivers flooded entire regions for months at a time. Soil seemed poor for large-scale agriculture. Visibility disappeared beneath the canopy. Insects spread disease. Heat and humidity exhausted explorers within days. To many Europeans arriving in South America centuries ago, the Amazon looked less like a place where civilizations could flourish and more like a vast green barrier separating humans from the unknown. And yet, hidden beneath those assumptions, the rainforest may have been holding one of the greatest archaeological surprises on Earth. Because long before satellites, drones, or LiDAR scans began revealing shapes beneath the canopy, indigenous stories already suggested something many outsiders struggled to believe. The Amazon may never have been empty wilderness at all. At night, when fog drifts slowly above blackwater rivers and distant insects vibrate through the darkness, it becomes easier to imagine how isolated ancient communities must have felt here. Villages separated by enormous forests, rivers functioning like highways through a world where movement on land could become nearly impossible. Entire cultures developing inside ecosystems so biologically overwhelming that survival itself required generations of accumulated knowledge. But isolation does not necessarily mean simplicity. And the deeper archaeologists study the Amazon, the more evidence suggests that ancient societies here may have been far more organized, interconnected, and environmentally sophisticated than earlier historians assumed. One reason this misunderstanding lasted so long is because the rainforest hides human history exceptionally well. In dry deserts, ruins can remain exposed for thousands of years. In the Amazon, the forest consumes almost everything. Wood decays rapidly. Plants overgrow structures. Rivers erase settlements. Soil shifts constantly. Within decades, abandoned villages can nearly disappear beneath vegetation. Within centuries, entire civilizations may become almost invisible from ground level, which means, for a very long time, researchers simply lacked the tools to see what might still exist beneath the canopy. That began changing dramatically in recent decades. Using LiDAR technology, laser mapping systems capable of penetrating forest cover from aircraft, researchers started identifying geometric earthworks, raised fields, ancient road systems, canals, settlement networks, and large human-modified landscapes across parts of the Amazon basin. Some discoveries appeared in places previously assumed incapable of supporting dense populations, and slowly, an unsettling possibility emerged. What if historians had fundamentally underestimated the scale of ancient Amazonian societies? Certain regions now show evidence of carefully planned settlements, connected through road networks and surrounded by engineered landscapes. In some areas, forests themselves may have been intentionally shaped over centuries, creating what some researchers describe as domesticated forests, filled with useful plant species managed by human communities over long periods of time. The rainforest, in other words, may not be entirely natural in the way modern people often imagine. Parts of it may represent ancient collaboration between humans and ecology on enormous scales. That idea changes the emotional feeling of the Amazon immediately. Because suddenly, the forest no longer seems untouched by civilization. Instead, it begins to feel haunted by civilizations hidden so deeply that the jungle itself absorbed them. And unlike lost cities buried in desert sand or frozen beneath ice, the Amazon does not preserve ruins cleanly. It dissolves them into living systems. A raised mound becomes a hill covered in trees. A road disappears beneath roots. A canal fills with dark water and fish. The rainforest erases sharp boundaries between nature and history until both become almost impossible to separate. Some archaeologists believe millions of people may once have lived throughout parts of the Amazon before European contact. Others argue estimates remain uncertain and probably varied enormously by region. Debate continues, partly because evidence is still emerging and partly because the rainforest itself makes excavation extraordinarily difficult. But there is little doubt now that ancient Amazonian societies were far more complex than earlier generations of historians believed. And perhaps one of the most fascinating clues lies not in architecture, but in soil. Across portions of the rainforest, researchers discovered areas of dark, fertile earth, known as terra preta. Unlike surrounding nutrient-poor soil, these regions contain charcoal, food waste, organic material, and signs of long-term human activity. Some remain remarkably fertile centuries after their creation. The implications are enormous. If ancient populations intentionally engineered productive soil systems within the rainforest, then they may have solved ecological challenges outsiders assumed were impossible. Rather than destroying the forest to survive, some communities may have learned how to work within its biological systems with extraordinary sophistication. That possibility feels strangely modern, especially when compared to how many industrial societies later treated the Amazon. But the deeper mystery is how much knowledge disappeared before outsiders fully understood it. When Europeans entered the Americas, diseases spread with catastrophic speed. Smallpox, influenza, measles, and other illnesses moved through indigenous populations who possessed little immunity to them. Entire communities collapsed before direct contact even occurred in some regions, as diseases traveled faster than explorers themselves. Some historians believe this demographic collapse may have profoundly altered the appearance of the Amazon before many Europeans fully documented it. In other words, early explorers may have encountered a rainforest already partially emptied, villages abandoned, agricultural systems collapsing, road networks disappearing beneath vegetation, populations reduced so rapidly that later observers mistakenly assumed the forest had always been sparsely inhabited. If true, the consequences are staggering. It would mean parts of the untouched wilderness Europeans described may actually have been recovering landscapes shaped by recent human catastrophe. And even now, fragments of those lost worlds continue emerging from beneath the trees. In certain regions, archaeologists uncovered enormous geometric earthworks visible clearly only from above. Circles, squares, ditches, and interconnected patterns cut into the land centuries ago. Some may have ceremonial significance. Others could relate to defense, settlement organization, water management, or combinations of many purposes researchers still debate. The scale alone suggests organized labor far beyond tiny, isolated villages. And then there are the roads, straight lines running through rainforest terrain that modern people often struggle to navigate, even with advanced equipment. Some ancient pathways connected settlements across surprisingly large distances, raising questions about trade, communication, and political organization inside environments long assumed too hostile for complex infrastructure. But perhaps the most mysterious aspect of ancient Amazonian life is how differently these societies may have understood the forest itself. To outsiders, the rainforest often appears chaotic, overwhelming biological excess without obvious structure. Yet indigenous communities surviving there for generations developed astonishingly detailed ecological knowledge. Medicinal plants, animal migration patterns, flood cycles, poison preparation, navigation, seasonal changes, nearly invisible to outsiders. Some researchers estimate only a fraction of Amazonian plant chemistry has been studied scientifically, despite indigenous groups using rainforest medicines for centuries. Certain compounds later attracted enormous pharmaceutical interest after researchers began investigating traditional botanical knowledge more seriously, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Modern science may still be rediscovering fragments of understanding indigenous cultures possessed long ago, and much of that knowledge remains vulnerable. Even today, isolated groups continue living within parts of the Amazon with minimal outside contact. Some avoid contact intentionally, often because previous encounters with outsiders brought violence, disease, exploitation, or displacement. Governments and researchers debate how best to protect such communities while balancing pressures from logging, mining, agriculture, and development expanding deeper into rainforest regions. From above, isolated villages can appear startlingly small against the endless forests surrounding them. Tiny clearings beside rivers or hidden beneath canopy gaps. But their existence changes the emotional atmosphere of the Amazon, because suddenly the rainforest stops feeling entirely ancient. It becomes present, living, still inhabited by cultures connected to landscapes outsiders barely understand. And perhaps that continuity explains why the Amazon remains so psychologically powerful. Unlike many ancient civilizations separated completely from modern life, parts of Amazonian cultural history never fully disappeared. Languages survive. Oral traditions survive. Ecological knowledge survives. Ritual practices survive. Even after centuries of disruption, fragments of older relationships between humans and rainforest ecosystems continue existing within living communities today. At night, around distant fires hidden somewhere beyond the rivers and canopy, stories are still being told in languages many outsiders have never heard. Stories about animals, spirits, floods, stars, ancestors, and forests. Some may preserve historical memory in symbolic form. Others may reflect environmental knowledge encoded through generations. And some may simply belong to cultures whose complexity outsiders still fail to recognize fully. Because perhaps the greatest misconception about the Amazon was never that it lacked civilization. Perhaps it was assuming civilization could only look one way. The rainforest rewards different forms of intelligence than deserts, grasslands, or industrial cities. Survival here required understanding water, plants, insects, seasonal rhythms, animal behavior, navigation, poison, medicine, sound, and weather with extraordinary precision. And communities that endured inside this environment for centuries or even millennia were not surviving because the forest was weak. They survived because they learned how to listen to something far more powerful than themselves. Even now, beneath the canopy, traces of those forgotten worlds remain scattered through the rainforest. Buried roads beneath roots, dark fertile soil beneath leaves, ancient earthworks hidden under vines, fragments of pottery beside rivers, and somewhere deep inside the Amazon tonight, entire histories may still be sleeping quietly beneath the trees, waiting for the forest to reveal them again. From the floor of the Amazon rainforest, it is almost impossible to understand what truly exists above you. The canopy hides everything. Layers of leaves block sunlight so completely that even during midday, parts of the forest remain dim and shadowed. Moisture drips constantly from branches hundreds of feet overhead. Vines descend through darkness like ropes disappearing into another world. And somewhere, far above the insects, the mist, and the tangled undergrowth, enormous trees are locked in a slow competition that has been unfolding for millions of years. At first glance, the rainforest feels peaceful, still, almost sleepy. But the deeper scientists study the Amazon, the more it begins to resemble a battlefield fought at a pace humans rarely notice. A constant struggle for light, water, space, survival, and time itself. Because in the rainforest, sunlight is everything, and only a tiny fraction of it ever reaches the ground. That single fact may explain why Amazonian trees evolved into some of the most extraordinary living structures on Earth. Certain emergent trees rise more than 200 feet above the forest floor, towering beyond the main canopy like isolated skyscrapers breaking through green clouds. Their trunks can become massive, roots spreading outward in enormous walls called buttress roots that stabilize them in shallow rainforest soil. Many visitors imagine these roots plunge deep underground. Often, they do not. Amazonian soil, despite supporting immense life, can be surprisingly thin and nutrient poor. Instead of growing downward, some giant trees spread roots outward across the surface to gather nutrients quickly before rain washes them away. The forest survives through speed and recycling rather than abundance. Even fallen leaves rarely remain untouched for long. Fungi consume them. Insects shred them. Microorganisms break them apart almost immediately. Nutrients move constantly through the ecosystem, like circulating blood, and towering above all of it, the trees continue competing for access to the sun. Some begin life in darkness for decades. Tiny saplings wait beneath the canopy, surviving on almost no direct sunlight at all. Then one day, somewhere nearby, an ancient giant collapses. Maybe lightning struck it. Maybe disease weakened it. Maybe heavy rains destabilized its roots. The crash opens a sudden hole in the canopy overhead, and instantly, everything changes. Sunlight floods downward. Dormant plants surge into rapid growth. Vines climb violently toward the opening. Saplings race upward. The forest reacts almost explosively to opportunity. What appears stable from a distance is actually in constant motion. One of the strangest participants in this struggle is the strangler fig. Its life often begins high above the ground. Birds or monkeys carry seeds into the canopy, where they land inside cracks or moss growing on another tree. The fig sprouts there first, not in soil below. Thin roots begin descending slowly toward the ground, while branches spread outward toward sunlight. At first, the host tree may barely seem affected, but over years, sometimes centuries, the fig expands around it. Roots tighten. Branches block sunlight. Competition intensifies. Eventually, the original host may die entirely, leaving behind a hollow column of intertwined roots where another living tree once stood. To early explorers, strangler figs appeared almost malicious, trees consuming other trees from above. But ecologically, the relationship is more complicated. The rainforest creates extreme competition for sunlight, and evolution rewards whatever strategies succeed within those conditions. The Amazon does not operate according to human ideas of fairness. It rewards adaptation. And perhaps nowhere is adaptation stranger than among the vines. Lianas twist through the rainforest canopy in astonishing numbers, connecting trees across huge distances. Some grow thick as human bodies, hanging between branches like suspended bridges. Others remain thin and nearly invisible until touched. Researchers still debate exactly how much influence these vines have on forest dynamics overall. But in many regions, they significantly increase competition by weighing down trees and reducing access to sunlight. During storms, interconnected vines can even pull multiple trees down together when one collapses. Yet they also create pathways. Monkeys travel across them. Insects live inside them. Birds nest around them. The rainforest rarely creates anything serving only one purpose. Even decay becomes opportunity. When giant trees finally fall, they do not simply disappear. Their trunks become entire ecosystems. Fungi spread across bark. Beetles tunnel into wood. Ant colonies move inside hollow spaces. Seedlings emerge from decomposing surfaces. Some fallen giants continue feeding life for decades after death. And in certain areas of the Amazon, scientists discovered something even more surprising. Some trees appear capable of communicating chemically. Through underground fungal networks, sometimes called the Wood Wide Web, plants may exchange nutrients and chemical signals across root systems connected by fungi. Research in this field is still developing, and scientists debate the complexity of these interactions. But evidence increasingly suggests forests are far more interconnected than humans once realized. A damaged tree may release chemical warnings. Nearby plants may respond defensively. Nutrients can potentially move between connected organisms under certain conditions. The rainforest, in other words, may function less like isolated individual trees and more like overlapping biological systems sharing information constantly beneath the soil. That possibility changes the emotional feeling of the forest completely, because suddenly the Amazon no longer feels passive. It feels aware, not conscious in a human sense perhaps, but responsive, adaptive, and deeply interconnected in ways humans are only beginning to understand. And while trees battle for sunlight above, many plants evolved far stranger survival strategies below the canopy. Some produce toxins powerful enough to discourage insects from feeding on their leaves. Others generate chemicals attracting ants that aggressively defend them against predators. Certain flowers bloom only briefly at night to attract highly specialized pollinators like bats or moths. In parts of the rainforest, entire species may depend on single relationships developed over immense evolutionary time. A specific bee pollinating a specific flower, a specific monkey dispersing a specific seed, a specific fungus decomposing a specific tree. And if one disappears, others may begin unraveling alongside it. That fragility is part of what makes the Amazon so biologically intense. The system became extraordinarily rich, partly because species adapted so precisely to one another over millions of years. But specialization can also create vulnerability. Some researchers worry climate shifts, deforestation, or changing rainfall patterns could disrupt relationships too interconnected to fully predict. Because the rainforest depends not merely on individual organisms surviving, but on countless invisible interactions continuing uninterrupted. Even the atmosphere above the canopy reflects this complexity. The Amazon releases enormous amounts of water vapor through transpiration, moisture emitted from leaves into the air. Some scientists describe parts of the rainforest as generating their own weather systems. Massive, flying rivers of atmospheric moisture drift across South America, influencing rainfall patterns far beyond the forest itself. In a sense, the trees are helping create the climate they depend on, which makes the Amazon feel less like a forest and more like a living, planetary mechanism. And still, despite centuries of exploration, parts of the canopy remain remarkably understudied. For a long time, scientists focused primarily on the forest floor because reaching the upper canopy was so difficult. But high above the ground exists another world, almost separate from the one below, filled with insects, orchids, bromeliads, frogs, birds, monkeys, and entire microhabitats rarely descending to Earth. Some canopy organisms spend nearly their entire lives far above the forest floor. Tiny pools of water trapped inside plants become nurseries for frogs and insects. Moss-covered branches support miniature ecosystems hidden hundreds of feet overhead. Certain species may exist only within extremely narrow environmental conditions found in isolated canopy zones. And because access remains difficult, new discoveries continue emerging there regularly. The deeper researchers climb into the rainforest, the stranger it becomes. Trees growing on trees, gardens suspended in branches, roots hanging in open air, flowers pollinated only after dark, invisible fungal networks beneath the soil, vines pulling down giants, slowly over decades, chemical warfare between leaves and insects, ancient trunks supporting entire worlds long after death. What appears peaceful from a distance is actually constant negotiation between millions of living organisms competing and cooperating simultaneously. And perhaps that explains why standing inside the Amazon often feels emotionally overwhelming. Not because the forest is empty, but because it is too full, too interconnected, too alive. Every direction contains movement hidden beneath stillness. Even silence in the rainforest usually means life operating beyond human perception. Above the canopy tonight, warm winds move through leaves that may be centuries old. Orchids cling to branches suspended high above darkness. Monkeys sleep curled beside vines thicker than ropes. Insects feed beneath bark. Fungi spread invisibly through roots below the soil. And somewhere in the distance, another giant tree is already beginning its slow climb toward the sunlight, joining a competition that started millions of years before humans ever arrived to witness it. At night, the Amazon River does not look like a river at all. It looks like darkness itself has started moving. The water reflects almost nothing beneath the heavy rainforest sky. Mist drifts low across the surface. Branches lean over black currents that stretch beyond visibility. Somewhere in the distance, unseen animals break the silence with brief splashes before disappearing again into the warm tropical night. And beneath that surface, hidden below the drifting sediment and flooded roots, exists one of the strangest freshwater worlds on Earth. A world so enormous that even now, scientists still struggle to fully map, measure, and understand it. Most people imagine rivers as boundaries cutting through landscapes. The Amazon behaves more like a living circulatory system. Its network of rivers, tributaries, flooded forests, lakes, channels, wetlands, and underground flows stretches across enormous portions of South America. During rainy seasons, the system expands so dramatically that entire sections of rainforest disappear underwater for months at a time. Trees stand submerged in dark water, while fish move through branches high above what was once dry forest floor. In some places, the river can spread miles beyond its normal banks, and when viewed from above, the floodplains resemble an inland ocean slowly breathing with the seasons. What makes this system especially difficult to comprehend is scale. The Amazon River carries more water than any river on Earth. Every second, enormous volumes of fresh water pour toward the Atlantic Ocean. So much, in fact, that the river alters ocean salinity far out into the sea. Satellite imagery can sometimes detect plumes of Amazon fresh water extending into the Atlantic for astonishing distances. But numbers alone fail to capture what the river feels like. Because the Amazon is not simply large. It feels alive in a way few waterways do. Currents shift unpredictably. Entire islands appear and disappear. Riverbanks collapse overnight. Channels migrate over time, slowly redrawing maps beneath the rainforest. In some regions, water levels rise and fall by more than 30 feet between seasons, transforming entire ecosystems repeatedly every single year. And beneath those waters, evolution adapted to conditions unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Visibility inside many Amazonian rivers is incredibly limited. Sediment, tannins, decaying vegetation, and organic matter often turn the water brown or nearly black. In certain blackwater rivers, sunlight penetrates only shallow depths before dissolving into darkness. For animals living there, sight becomes unreliable. So many species evolved alternative ways of understanding the world. Electric fish are one remarkable example. The Amazon contains species capable of generating electrical fields powerful enough to navigate, communicate, hunt, and in some cases, defend themselves. The electric eels, despite the name, are not technically true eels at all, but highly specialized knife fish adapted for murky environments where ordinary senses become less effective. Their electrical discharges can reach astonishing voltages. For centuries, local stories about shocking fish sounded exaggerated to outsiders. Yet modern research confirmed just how powerful these animals can be. Large electric eels are capable of stunning prey, deterring predators, and potentially injuring humans under certain conditions. But perhaps even stranger than their power is what it represents evolutionarily. The river became so dark and visually confusing that some animals effectively evolved a new sensory system altogether. And they are not alone. The Amazon river dolphin, with its flexible neck and elongated snout, moves through flooded forests using sophisticated echolocation, navigating drowned branches where vision alone would fail. Catfish rely heavily on chemical detection. Some fish use vibrations. Others sense tiny changes in pressure through specialized organs along their bodies. The deeper scientists study Amazonian rivers, the more the underwater world begins to resemble an alien environment governed by unfamiliar rules. And then there are the forests beneath the floods. During high water seasons, massive areas known as várzea forests become submerged for months. Fish disperse deep into the flooded trees, feeding on fruits, seeds, insects, and organisms inaccessible during dry seasons. In certain areas, the boundary between river and forest almost disappears entirely. Fish swim among branches. Roots vanish beneath dark currents. Tree trunks rise directly from the water, like pillars holding up the jungle itself. Some species evolved specifically around these seasonal transformations. Certain fish now depend on flooded forests for feeding and reproduction. Some trees evolved fruit timed precisely with flood cycles, so seeds disperse through aquatic animals, carrying them across enormous distances. The rainforest and river are not separate systems. They continuously create one another. And hidden within that relationship are predators older than human civilization itself. Black caimans drift almost invisibly through still water at night, their eyes reflecting faint light above the surface before disappearing again into darkness. In previous centuries, hunting nearly drove some populations toward collapse in parts of the Amazon. But protected areas later allowed partial recoveries. Large individuals can become enormous, silent, patient, perfectly adapted for ambush within flooded ecosystems where visibility already favors predators. But even creatures like caimans may not fully represent how strange the Amazon once was. Millions of years ago, ancient wetlands across South America supported gigantic crocodilian relatives unlike anything alive today. Some species reached sizes difficult to imagine in modern freshwater systems. Giant turtles, massive river predators, and enormous serpentine reptiles moved through prehistoric waterways long before the modern Amazon fully formed. And traces of that ancient world still linger psychologically in the rivers now. Perhaps that is why stories about giant, unseen creatures continue appearing across Amazonian folklore. Enormous snakes, unknown fish, shadowy animals surfacing briefly before disappearing beneath muddy currents, most likely have ordinary explanations rooted in real wildlife, exaggeration, environmental distortion, or oral tradition evolving over generations. Yet, the river itself encourages uncertainty. Visibility is poor. Distances are deceptive. Vast areas remain sparsely explored. And human beings naturally imagine larger possibilities whenever they cannot fully see beneath the surface. Especially in water this dark, some sections of the Amazon appear almost black under moonlight, due to tannins released by decaying vegetation. These blackwater rivers often contain surprisingly low mosquito populations and highly specialized aquatic chemistry. Nearby, whitewater rivers carry heavy sediment loads from the Andes, creating entirely different ecological conditions. Even the color of the river changes what kinds of life survive there. And still, scientists continue finding new species. Hundreds of fish species alone inhabit the Amazon basin, possibly thousands, depending on classification debates and newly discovered populations. Tiny transparent fish drift through flooded roots. Armored catfish cling to submerged surfaces. Predators hide motionless near riverbanks. Some species breathe atmospheric air during low oxygen conditions. Others survive seasonal droughts by burying themselves in mud. The river rewards flexibility relentlessly because conditions change constantly. Floods reshape habitats. Drought isolates populations. Sediment alters channels. Trees fall into currents. Water chemistry shifts between regions. Few environments remain stable for long, and perhaps that instability explains why Amazonian freshwater biodiversity became so extraordinary in the first place. Isolation creates divergence. Rivers split populations apart. Flood cycles reconnect them. Over immense spans of time, evolution experiments endlessly with new adaptations. The result is not just biological richness, it is biological unpredictability. Even today, researchers sometimes pull unfamiliar organisms from Amazonian waters that challenge existing assumptions about distribution, behavior, or ecology. And beneath all of this complexity lies another mystery few people realize exists. The Amazon may possess underground rivers as well. Scientists studying geological formations beneath the basin identified evidence suggesting extremely slow-moving subterranean water systems deep below the surface river itself. Some researchers describe these as underground rivers, though their exact structure and behavior remain debated. The idea feels strangely fitting, a hidden river beneath the largest river on Earth, an unseen world beneath another unseen world, because the Amazon constantly reveals that every layer conceals another one below it. Above the surface, rainforest canopies trap humidity beneath leaves. Below the surface, roots spread through drowned soil. Under the rivers, sediments bury ancient landscapes. And somewhere beneath all of it, water may still be moving silently through darkness humans rarely witness directly. At night, floating along certain stretches of the Amazon, it becomes easier to understand why so many myths emerged from these waters. The river feels less like geography and more like an enormous living presence, breathing, shifting, carrying life through the continent with a force impossible to fully control. Somewhere nearby, fish move through submerged forests, invisible beneath black water. Electric predators pulse through muddy currents. River dolphins navigate drowned branches using sound. Caimans drift silently beside flooded roots. Ancient sediments wash eastward from mountains formed millions of years ago. And below the dark surface tonight, inside the largest river system on Earth, entire worlds continue moving unseen through the current. Even after centuries of exploration, satellite imaging, aerial mapping, climate modeling, and biological research, the Amazon still contains enormous scientific mysteries that nobody fully agrees on. And perhaps that is the strangest thing about the rainforest. Not simply that it is large, but that despite everything modern science can measure, scan, sequence, and analyze, the Amazon still refuses to become entirely predictable. At night, when fog settles over flooded forests and distant thunder rolls somewhere beyond the canopy, the rainforest feels less like a location being studied and more like a system operating according to rules humans only partially understand. Because the deeper researchers investigate the Amazon, the more complicated it becomes. One of the biggest mysteries begins not on the ground, but in the sky. For years, scientists studying South American climate noticed something extraordinary. Massive quantities of moisture rise continuously from the rainforest into the atmosphere through evaporation and transpiration. Trees release water vapor from their leaves. Rivers evaporate under tropical heat. Wet soil contributes additional moisture. Together, these processes create enormous airborne currents, sometimes called flying rivers. The term sounds poetic, but the phenomenon is very real. Invisible streams of atmospheric moisture move across the continent, influencing rainfall patterns thousands of miles away. Some researchers argue the Amazon helps stabilize climate systems far beyond its own borders. Moisture generated in the rainforest may eventually contribute to rainfall, feeding distant agricultural regions across South America. In other words, the forest may help create the weather it depends on. But exactly how resilient that system remains is still heavily debated. Some climate models suggest the Amazon can tolerate significant environmental pressure while continuing to function. Others warn that beyond certain thresholds of deforestation or warming, rainfall cycles could weaken enough to permanently alter large portions of the rainforest. This possibility is often described as a tipping point, not a sudden overnight collapse, but a gradual transformation where parts of the forest become unable to sustain the same moisture cycles that once maintained dense rainforest conditions. And what makes the debate especially unsettling is that scientists still disagree on precisely where that threshold might exist, or whether some regions may already be approaching it. The Amazon, despite all its biological abundance, may depend on balances more fragile than they first appear. And yet, fragility alone does not explain the rainforest's complexity, because even basic questions about biodiversity remain incomplete. Researchers estimate millions of species may live within the Amazon basin, but only a fraction have been formally documented. Insects alone represent enormous unknown territory. Fungi remain drastically understudied. Microbial life inside rainforest soils may contain biological interactions scientists barely understand. Entire ecosystems may still exist, hidden high in the canopy, or isolated within remote floodplains, rarely visited by researchers. And sometimes, the forest reveals surprises in places scientists thought they already understood. New mammals continue being identified, new amphibians, new fish, new plant species. Occasionally, even large animals appear in regions where they were not expected. It is difficult to think of many places on Earth where entirely undocumented species still emerge with such regularity, and that uncertainty extends into the past as well. For generations, historians assumed the Amazon could never support large human populations due to poor soil and ecological difficulty. Then, archaeological discoveries began challenging those assumptions. Ancient road systems, earthworks, engineered landscapes, and fertile terra preta soils suggested far more sophisticated societies may once have existed beneath the canopy. But researchers still debate scale, organization, and population estimates intensely. How many people actually lived there? How interconnected were ancient settlements? How much of the forest was intentionally shaped by human activity? No consensus fully exists yet. Some scientists believe huge portions of the rainforest may have been influenced by centuries of indigenous land management. Others argue human impact varied dramatically depending on region and ecology. The deeper archaeologists investigate, the less certain older narratives become. And perhaps that uncertainty is appropriate for a forest that constantly hides its own history beneath living growth. Even the rivers contain unresolved mysteries. Take Blackwater rivers, for example. Their dark coloration comes largely from tannins released by decaying vegetation, creating acidic conditions distinct from nearby sediment-heavy whitewater rivers flowing from the Andes. These dramatically different water chemistries support different ecosystems, species distributions, and biological adaptations. But scientists still study why some organisms thrive only in certain river systems, despite apparent similarities elsewhere. Some fish populations become isolated by subtle environmental differences humans barely notice. Others evolve unusual sensory adaptations in muddy, low-visibility water. And because river channels constantly shift over geological time, evolutionary histories become extremely difficult to reconstruct clearly. The rainforest itself may function partly as an engine of biological isolation and reconnection, happening repeatedly over millions of years. Which leads into another major scientific mystery. Why is the Amazon so unbelievably diverse in the first place? Several explanations compete. Some researchers emphasize climatic stability over long periods, allowing species to specialize gradually. Others focus on ancient river barriers separating populations into isolated evolutionary zones. Another hypothesis proposes that during colder, drier periods in Earth's past, rainforests contracted into isolated pockets called refugia, where species evolved separately before forests later expanded and reconnected. Evidence exists supporting aspects of multiple theories, but no single explanation fully solves the puzzle. And perhaps the answer is not one mechanism, but many interacting across immense spans of time. That possibility appears again and again in Amazon science. Simple explanations rarely survive for long. The forest continuously reveals overlapping systems influencing one another simultaneously. Trees affect rainfall. Rainfall affects rivers. Rivers affect biodiversity. Biodiversity affects soil. Soil affects forest growth. And hidden beneath all of this may be interactions scientists still have not recognized yet. Some mysteries are even stranger. Satellite imagery has revealed enormous geometric formations beneath portions of the Amazon. Circles, squares, lines, and earthworks hidden under forest cover. Some clearly resulted from ancient human activity. Others remain more difficult to interpret confidently. Why were certain shapes built? Ceremonial purposes? Agriculture? Defense? Astronomical alignments? Researchers continue debating possibilities. And because dense vegetation concealed many structures for centuries, new discoveries continue emerging regularly as imaging technology improves. It creates the unsettling feeling that the rainforest may still be hiding entire chapters of human history in plain sight. Even sound inside the Amazon remains scientifically valuable in ways researchers only recently began studying deeply. Using acoustic monitoring systems, scientists discovered healthy forests produce distinct sound signatures filled with biological activity across multiple frequencies. Damaged ecosystems often become quieter in measurable ways. Researchers can now partially monitor ecological health by listening to the rainforest itself. The forest, in a sense, broadcasts information constantly, but understanding that information remains difficult because Amazon systems are so interconnected. One change triggers others, and sometimes consequences appear far from their original causes. Deforestation in one area may influence rainfall somewhere else. River warming affects fish migration. Smoke alters atmospheric chemistry. Drought increases fire vulnerability in ecosystems not historically adapted for frequent burning. The rainforest behaves less like separate, isolated habitats and more like a vast living network where disturbances travel unpredictably across enormous distances. And still, there are mysteries hidden even deeper. Beneath the Amazon basin, researchers identified evidence suggesting enormous underground water systems moving slowly beneath surface rivers. Some scientists describe them cautiously as subterranean rivers, though debate continues regarding their structure and terminology. The idea almost sounds symbolic. A hidden river beneath the largest river on Earth. An unseen system supporting another unseen system. But perhaps the most profound mystery is not biological or geological at all. Perhaps it is psychological. Why does the Amazon affect human imagination so powerfully? People who spend time there often describe similar feelings: awe, disorientation, fascination, vulnerability, sensory overload. The rainforest compresses visibility while expanding scale beyond comprehension. It surrounds human beings with life so dense and interconnected that ordinary categories begin breaking down. Nothing feels isolated. Everything appears connected to something else hidden beyond sight. And maybe that emotional response exists because the Amazon reveals something modern civilization rarely experiences anymore: limits to understanding. In many parts of the modern world, humans expect complete maps, complete data, complete explanations. But the Amazon resists that instinct. Even with satellites overhead and advanced genetic analysis in laboratories, enormous uncertainties remain. Unknown species, unmapped ecosystems, unresolved climate interactions, debated archaeological histories, incomplete evolutionary explanations. And somewhere tonight, beneath the rainforest canopy, while insects pulse through humid darkness, and rivers carry sediments silently toward the Atlantic, processes are still unfolding that science has not fully explained yet. New species are adapting. Fungal networks are spreading underground. Floodwaters are reshaping habitats. Ancient soils are storing forgotten histories. Moisture is rising invisibly into atmospheric rivers above the trees. And deep inside the largest rainforest on Earth, the unknown is still very much alive. Long before the Amazon became a rainforest filled with jaguars, orchids, flooded forests, and blackwater rivers, this region belonged to a world almost impossible to imagine now. A hotter world, a wetter world, a stranger world. At night, standing beside the modern Amazon River, while insects vibrate through the darkness and warm mist drifts across the water. It is difficult to picture what existed here millions of years ago. But beneath the rainforest soil, hidden under layers of sediment and roots, traces of that ancient world still remain. Fragments of bones, fossilized teeth, buried shells, and geological clues suggesting the Amazon was once home to creatures so enormous and unfamiliar that they seem closer to mythology than biology. And perhaps the strangest part is that the rainforest itself still carries echoes of that prehistoric past. Because the Amazon did not suddenly appear fully formed. It evolved through enormous climatic shifts, rising mountains, changing oceans, flooded wetlands, and extinctions unfolding across spans of time so large that human history becomes almost invisible by comparison. Millions of years ago, before the modern Amazon River fully developed, much of northern South America may have looked less like dense jungle and more like an immense network of swamps, inland seas, wetlands, and shallow aquatic systems stretching across huge distances. Some researchers believe portions of western Amazonia remained underwater or semi-flooded for extremely long periods, creating isolated evolutionary environments unlike anything existing today. And in those waters, giant predators evolved. One of the most famous was Purosaurus, an enormous caiman relative that lived during the Miocene epoch roughly 8 million years ago. Fossil evidence suggests some individuals may have exceeded 30 feet in length, though exact size estimates remain debated among paleontologists. Even conservative estimates describe an animal far larger than modern crocodilians. Its bite force may have been among the strongest of any known vertebrate. And unlike modern river predators competing inside crowded ecosystems, Purosaurus evolved within prehistoric wetlands where massive prey animals were also common. Everything about that world appears oversized. Giant turtles, enormous rodents, massive fish, huge snakes. The ecosystem itself seems almost exaggerated, as though evolution briefly experimented with biological scale on a level difficult to sustain long term. And perhaps no prehistoric Amazonian creature captures human imagination more powerfully than Titanoboa. Discovered through fossil remains in northern South America, Titanoboa lived roughly 58 million years ago after the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs. Estimates suggest it may have reached lengths over 40 feet, potentially making it the largest snake known to science. Its existence tells scientists something important beyond size alone. Cold-blooded animals depend heavily on environmental temperature, and sustaining a snake that enormous likely required warmer global conditions than exist in most tropical regions today. In other words, Titanoboa may represent evidence of a greenhouse world far hotter and wetter than modern Earth. And that realization changes the emotional atmosphere of the prehistoric Amazon entirely, because suddenly the rainforest stops feeling ancient in a static sense. Instead, it begins feeling dynamic, constantly reshaped by climate, extinction, evolution, and geological upheaval over immense periods of time. Even the forests themselves were different. Flowering plants expanded dramatically after the age of dinosaurs, gradually transforming ecosystems worldwide. The ancestors of many modern Amazonian plants evolved alongside changing climates and animal populations, creating increasingly complex rainforest systems over millions of years. And through all those changes, the Amazon continued generating life adapted to instability, floods, heat, isolation, competition. One reason prehistoric South America became so evolutionarily unusual is because for long stretches of time, the continent remained relatively isolated from other land masses. That isolation allowed distinctive species to evolve independently in ways very different from North America, Africa, or Eurasia. Entire groups of strange mammals appeared. Some resembled giant armored tanks. Others evolved enormous claws. Predatory birds became dominant hunters in certain ecosystems long after dinosaurs vanished elsewhere. And while not all of these creatures lived directly inside Amazonian rainforest environments as we imagine them today, many evolved within broader South American systems connected to the region's prehistoric history. Then came another enormous shift, the rise of the Andes Mountains. As tectonic forces pushed the mountains upward over millions of years, river systems changed dramatically across the continent. Drainage patterns reorganized. Wetlands transformed. Sediments spread eastward. Eventually, the modern Amazon River system began taking shape, and those geological changes may have triggered evolutionary pressures across countless species simultaneously. Habitats fragmented, populations became isolated, new river barriers formed, flood cycles changed. The rainforest that eventually emerged was not stable paradise, but the product of continuous environmental disruption unfolding across deep time. Perhaps that is why Amazon biodiversity became so extreme. The forest was shaped not by permanence, but by repeated transformation. Even during more recent prehistoric periods, climate continued shifting. During the ice ages, the Amazon likely looked very different from today. Temperatures dropped globally, rainfall patterns changed, and scientists still debate exactly how rainforest coverage responded. Some researchers argue large portions of the forest contracted into isolated refuges surrounded by drier environments. Others believe the rainforest remained more continuous than earlier theories suggested. The debate matters because it may help explain why the Amazon contains such extraordinary species diversity today. If forests repeatedly fragmented and reconnected during ancient climate shifts, isolated populations may have evolved separately before later mixing again as rainforest expanded. The Amazon, in that sense, may partly owe its richness to ancient environmental instability, and perhaps traces of those prehistoric pressures still survive inside modern animals. Take the electric eel, or giant riverfish, or armored catfish resembling ancient lineages, or massive anacondas moving through flooded wetlands much as giant serpents may have done millions of years earlier. Some modern Amazonian species feel almost prehistoric, not because they remained unchanged, but because the rainforest preserved evolutionary conditions favoring ancient survival strategies. Dark water, dense vegetation, seasonal floods, hidden movement, ambush predation. Even now, parts of the Amazon can feel less like modern Earth and more like glimpses into biological systems operating according to older rules. And hidden beneath the rainforest, the fossil record remains frustratingly incomplete. Dense vegetation, acidic soils, rapid decomposition, and difficult excavation conditions mean much of the Amazon's prehistoric history remains poorly preserved compared to deserts or dry sedimentary regions elsewhere. Entire ecosystems may have existed without leaving extensive fossil evidence accessible to modern researchers. That uncertainty leaves room for enormous scientific gaps. What species evolved there that humans may never discover? How many prehistoric lineages disappeared without leaving enough traces to reconstruct clearly? What ancient interactions shaped the rainforest long before humans arrived? The Amazon constantly reminds scientists how partial the fossil record truly is. Sometimes a single tooth or fragment of bone completely changes previous assumptions. And because large portions of the basin remain difficult to study, surprises continue emerging. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of prehistoric Amazonia is not any single extinct creature. It is the realization that the rainforest itself survived extraordinary planetary changes. Asteroid impacts, global warming periods, ice ages, shifting oceans, rising mountains, mass extinctions. And through all of it, life in the region adapted repeatedly, rather than disappearing entirely. That resilience feels almost difficult to comprehend, especially at night, when modern Amazonian forests still pulse with sounds, movement, humidity, and biological intensity, much as ancient ecosystems once did, under entirely different skies. Somewhere above the canopy tonight, bats move through warm air, hunting insects whose evolutionary ancestors existed long before human civilization. Beneath blackwater rivers, armored fish drift through sediments, carrying minerals eroded from mountains, still rising slowly today. Anacondas slide through flooded vegetation in habitats shaped by millions of years of seasonal water cycles. And deep beneath the rainforest floor, hidden below roots and ancient soil, the remains of vanished worlds still wait silently in darkness. Gigantic predators, ancient wetlands, lost ecosystems, fragments of climates the modern Earth no longer remembers. The Amazon often feels timeless when viewed from above, but perhaps its greatest mystery is the opposite. The rainforest is not frozen in time at all. It is the surviving result of countless worlds that came before it. Worlds filled with creatures so strange, enormous, and ancient that even now, millions of years later, the forest still seems to carry their shadow. For most people alive today, the Amazon exists first as an image, a green shape on a map, a satellite photograph stretching endlessly across South America, mist rising above dark rivers, dense jungle disappearing into clouds. Very few people will ever stand inside the rainforest itself. Fewer still will travel deep enough to experience the strange psychological feeling the Amazon creates once roads disappear, phone signals vanish, and the forest begins surrounding every direction at once. And yet, despite how distant it remains from everyday life, the Amazon occupies an unusually powerful place in the modern imagination, partly because it still feels wild, partly because it still feels mysterious, but perhaps most of all, because the rainforest represents something modern civilization increasingly struggles to find. A place so vast, complicated, and biologically intense that humans still do not fully understand it. At night, viewed from space, parts of the Amazon become almost invisible beneath cloud cover and darkness. Rivers reflect faint traces of moonlight through gaps in the canopy. Thunderstorms pulse across enormous distances. Moisture rises silently into the atmosphere, while billions of organisms continue moving beneath the trees, completely unseen. And somewhere below those clouds, modern technology is trying to map a forest that constantly hides itself. For centuries, large sections of the Amazon remained extremely difficult to observe from above. Dense canopy concealed the ground so effectively that entire landscapes disappeared beneath vegetation. Explorers traveling through rivers could pass ancient earthworks, abandoned settlements, or hidden structures without realizing they existed nearby. Then satellite imagery changed everything. And later, LiDAR technology changed it again. Using aircraft equipped with laser scanning systems capable of penetrating gaps in forest cover, researchers began revealing geometric shapes, roads, terraces, canals, and settlement networks hidden beneath the trees. Some discoveries completely transformed assumptions about the Amazon's past. Places once believed empty showed signs of organized human activity. Forests once considered untouched revealed evidence of long-term ecological management. The rainforest began looking less like isolated wilderness and more like a landscape layered with forgotten human histories. But even modern imaging has limits. Cloud cover interferes constantly. Canopy density obscures detail. Flood cycles reshape terrain, and enormous regions remain difficult to study directly on the ground. The Amazon, even in the satellite age, still withholds information. That resistance to complete visibility may explain why the rainforest continues attracting such intense fascination in modern culture. People project enormous ideas onto it. Some imagine the Amazon as Earth's last untouched paradise. Others see it as fragile wilderness on the edge of collapse. Some focus on biodiversity, others on climate, others on lost civilizations, hidden species, unexplained sounds, or isolated tribes. The rainforest becomes whatever people fear, admire, or hope still exists beyond the modern world. And perhaps no phrase reflects this more than the lungs of the earth. The description became globally famous, but scientifically, it is more complicated than many realize. The Amazon certainly plays an enormous role in carbon storage, moisture cycling, and atmospheric processes, but the rainforest also consumes oxygen through respiration and decomposition. Scientists often debate how accurately the lungs metaphor captures the ecosystem's true function. Still, the phrase survived because emotionally it feels correct. The Amazon seems essential in a way larger than geography alone. It feels connected to the planet itself, and modern science increasingly suggests that instinct may not be entirely wrong. The rainforest influences rainfall patterns across huge distances. Massive atmospheric moisture systems generated partly by the forest affect climates far beyond the basin itself. Carbon stored in vegetation and soil interacts with global climate systems. River discharge alters ocean conditions. The Amazon is not isolated from the modern world. It is physically connected to it in ways many people never directly see. And yet, for all the scientific data now available, the rainforest still produces moments that feel strangely prehistoric. Fly low enough over certain regions, and endless forest stretches to every horizon without visible roads or cities. Some rivers twist through landscapes so remote that researchers still struggle to survey them comprehensively. During floods, entire forests vanish underwater, transforming ecosystems into submerged labyrinths difficult to navigate even with modern equipment. There are still places where humans remain visitors rather than controllers. That realization feels increasingly rare in the 21st century, especially in an age dominated by constant mapping, tracking, recording, and digital visibility. The Amazon resists simplification. And because it resists simplification, myths continue forming around it. Stories about hidden creatures persist online and in local folklore. Videos circulate, claiming unexplained discoveries beneath the canopy. Ancient civilizations become subjects of speculation. Some theories drift far beyond scientific evidence. Others emerge from genuine archaeological surprises that challenged earlier assumptions. The line between reality and imagination often blurs in environments where so much remains difficult to access directly. And perhaps the rainforest encourages that ambiguity naturally, because even modern researchers sometimes describe experiences there that feel psychologically disorienting. The forest compresses visibility. Sound behaves unpredictably. Distances become difficult to judge. Humidity alters perception. GPS systems fail beneath dense canopy. Weather changes rapidly. The rainforest overwhelms ordinary human orientation systems in subtle ways. It reminds people that modern technology, while powerful, still operates imperfectly inside environments evolved long before human civilization existed. At the same time, the Amazon has also become deeply connected to global economics and politics. Logging roads cut into forests, once reachable only by river. Mining operations expand into remote areas. Agricultural frontiers push deeper into the basin. Satellite monitoring now tracks deforestation almost in real time, allowing scientists and governments to observe changes at unprecedented scales. Yet even those measurements remain complicated. Some forests regenerate, others fragment. Some regions recover biologically faster than expected, others prove more vulnerable. The Amazon behaves differently depending on rainfall, soil, ecology, fire history, and countless interacting variables researchers still struggle to model precisely. Which means public discussions about the rainforest often simplify realities far more complex on the ground. And complexity may be the Amazon's defining characteristic. Even ecotourism reflects this contradiction. Modern travelers arrive seeking untouched wilderness while often relying on boats, aircraft, satellite communication, cameras, and infrastructure built from global systems reaching deep into the forest itself. Scientists study remote biodiversity using drones, genetic sequencing, AI-assisted monitoring, and advanced imaging technologies. The modern world and the ancient rainforest are no longer separate things. They overlap constantly now, and perhaps nowhere is that overlap more emotionally powerful than when isolated indigenous communities appear in aerial photographs or satellite imagery. Tiny villages beside winding rivers, small clearings surrounded by endless canopy. The images feel almost unreal, not because such communities are primitive. Many possess environmental knowledge outsiders barely comprehend, but because their existence reminds modern civilization that entirely different relationships with the natural world still survive, even now, even in the age of satellites. And perhaps that is why the Amazon continues holding such psychological power over modern people. The rainforest represents uncertainty in a civilization increasingly built around control. Unknown species may still exist there. Ancient structures remain hidden beneath trees. Climate interactions remain only partially understood. Flooded forests transform landscapes seasonally in ways impossible to fully predict. The deeper researchers look, the more layers emerge underneath earlier assumptions. And unlike many modern environments engineered for efficiency and visibility, the Amazon still feels larger than the systems trying to measure it. At night, from high above South America, storm clouds drift slowly across the basin, while rivers move invisibly beneath the darkness. Satellites pass overhead. Scientists analyze atmospheric moisture patterns from distant laboratories. Researchers study acoustic recordings captured beneath the canopy. Archaeologists examine LiDAR scans revealing forgotten geometric shapes beneath trees. And somewhere below all of that technology, hidden beneath roots, water, insects, mist, and darkness, the rainforest continues operating according to rhythms far older than modern civilization itself. A jaguar moves silently beside a flooded riverbank. Fish swim through submerged forests. Fungi spread beneath ancient soil. Unknown insects pulse through canopy shadows. Moisture rises invisibly into the night sky. And despite everything humans have learned about the Amazon, the forest still feels as though it belongs partly to another world beyond complete understanding. At night, the future of the Amazon feels impossible to see clearly. The rainforest stretches endlessly beneath drifting clouds, while rivers move through darkness, almost invisible from above. Warm rain falls across leaves older than human memory. Insects pulse through the canopy. Moisture rises silently into the atmosphere, just as it has for millions of years. And yet, somewhere far beyond the trees, roads continue expanding. Fires appear in satellite images. New clearings emerge where dense forest stood only months earlier. The modern world keeps moving closer. And the unsettling truth is that nobody knows with complete certainty what the Amazon will look like a century from now. For most of human history, the rainforest appeared almost indestructible, too vast to fully explore, too biologically intense to control, too immense to disappear. But modern science increasingly suggests that even ecosystems this large may depend on balances more delicate than they first seem. One reason the Amazon feels so difficult to predict is because the rainforest does not behave like a static landscape. It behaves like a living system. Trees release moisture into the air. Moisture influences rainfall. Rainfall shapes rivers. Rivers shape forests. Forests regulate temperature. Temperature affects evaporation. Everything connects to something else, which means changes rarely remain isolated for long. A road cutting into forest may alter drainage. Dry conditions increase vulnerability to fire. Fragmented canopy changes humidity near the ground. Species adapted to dense rainforest conditions may struggle in broken landscapes. And because the Amazon operates through overlapping biological relationships built over immense spans of time, scientists still debate how resilient the system truly is under growing pressure. Some researchers believe large portions of the rainforest retain extraordinary regenerative capacity. Others warn that certain thresholds could trigger long-term transformations difficult to reverse. Both possibilities may be partially true, depending on region, climate, and ecological history. That uncertainty defines almost every conversation about the Amazon's future. Even fire behaves differently here than many people assume. For much of its history, large sections of tropical rainforest were not ecosystems strongly adapted for frequent burning. Dense humidity and moisture limited fire spread naturally in many regions. But when forests become fragmented, dried, or exposed to repeated disturbance, vulnerability changes. Sunlight reaches the forest floor more easily. Vegetation dries faster. Wind penetrates deeper beneath broken canopy. Under those conditions, fires can spread into areas historically less exposed to them, and the consequences are not always immediately visible from above. Some forests survive partially damaged. Others regenerate surprisingly quickly. Certain species return, others disappear. The Amazon rarely responds uniformly, and perhaps that complexity is part of why scientific debates around the rainforest often feel unresolved. Models improve constantly, but predicting enormous living systems remains extraordinarily difficult, especially systems this interconnected. Take rainfall, for example. Some climate researchers worry that extensive deforestation, combined with warming temperatures, could weaken the moisture recycling systems helping sustain parts of the rainforest itself. Less forest could mean less atmospheric moisture. Less moisture could reduce rainfall. Reduced rainfall could place additional stress on forests already weakened by drought or fragmentation. A feedback loop, not sudden collapse necessarily, but gradual transformation. Yet other researchers caution that ecosystems often behave more dynamically than worst-case models predict. Certain forests demonstrate surprising resilience after disturbance. Secondary growth can recover rapidly under the right conditions. Some degraded landscapes regenerate faster than expected when protected. The future, in other words, remains uncertain, and uncertainty may be the most honest scientific answer available. What makes the Amazon emotionally powerful is not simply what could disappear. It is how much may vanish before humans even fully understand it. Thousands of species likely remain undocumented. Fungi hidden beneath soil. Insects high in isolated canopy systems. Fish populations living in remote tributaries. Plant chemistry never studied scientifically. Ancient archaeological sites still concealed beneath vegetation. Entire ecological relationships may exist unnoticed until disruption exposes them too late. The rainforest still contains unknowns, real unknowns, and that fact changes the emotional weight of every discussion about the future. Because unlike losing something fully cataloged and understood, parts of the Amazon could disappear before science even learns what existed there in the first place. A species may vanish without ever receiving a formal name. A medicinal compound may disappear inside an undocumented plant. An archaeological site may erode before excavation. An isolated language may fade alongside ecological displacement. The forest contains forms of knowledge modern civilization has not completely absorbed yet. Some of that knowledge survives within indigenous communities who have lived beside these ecosystems for generations. In many regions, indigenous managed territories often overlap with some of the most biologically preserved rainforest areas remaining today. That overlap has become increasingly important in modern environmental discussions. not because indigenous societies exist outside modern reality, but because long-term survival inside the Amazon required extraordinarily detailed understanding of water cycles, plants, animal behavior, seasonal change, navigation, soil, medicine, and ecological balance. And perhaps modern civilization is only beginning to recognize how valuable some of that knowledge may be. At the same time, enormous pressures continue reshaping the basin. Mining operations expand into remote areas. Illegal logging penetrates deeper forests. Agricultural systems demand land. Global markets influence decisions occurring thousands of miles away from the rainforest itself. The Amazon, despite its apparent isolation, is deeply connected to modern economic systems now. And yet, even under growing pressure, the forest continues displaying extraordinary resilience in many places. Abandoned clearings sometimes begin regrowing almost immediately. Vines spread, saplings emerge, insects return, bird calls reappear. The rainforest constantly attempts to reclaim space. That regenerative force can feel almost eerie when witnessed directly. Nature moving back into abandoned roads, roots breaking through concrete, young forests rising where destruction once appeared permanent. The Amazon does not surrender easily. And perhaps that resilience comes from the same instability that shaped the rainforest from the beginning. Floods changed landscapes for millions of years. Rivers shifted constantly. Climate fluctuated. Species adapted repeatedly. The forest survived asteroid impacts, ice ages, rising mountains, and ancient extinctions long before humans arrived. Which raises an uncomfortable question scientists still debate carefully. How much change can the Amazon absorb before adaptation becomes transformation? Because ecosystems do not necessarily vanish completely. Sometimes they become something different. A dense rainforest may shift toward drier woodland. Flood cycles may alter species distributions. Certain organisms may expand while others retreat. The future may not involve simple destruction or survival, but ecological change unfolding unevenly across enormous regions over long periods of time. And humans will likely influence that process, whether intentionally or not. Perhaps that realization is what makes the future of the Amazon feel so emotionally complicated. The rainforest no longer exists separately from humanity. Satellite systems monitor it constantly. Climate models depend on it. Global industries affect it. Scientific discoveries emerge from it. Its future is now tied directly to decisions occurring far beyond the canopy itself. And still, despite all the technology surrounding it, the Amazon retains something fundamentally mysterious. At night, drifting along a dark river while thunder rolls somewhere beyond the forest, the rainforest still feels larger than human systems trying to measure or control it. Mist rises through the canopy. Frogs call from flooded trees. Fish move beneath black water. Moisture drifts invisibly into atmospheric rivers overhead. Ancient roots continue spreading beneath the soil. And somewhere deep inside the forest tonight, seedlings are already growing into trees that may outlive everyone alive today. Perhaps that is the strangest thing about the Amazon's future. It is not only a story about loss, it is also a story about time. Human civilization often thinks in decades. The rainforest evolved across millions of years, and even now, while scientists debate climate thresholds, governments argue policy, Satellites monitor deforestation, and researchers search for new species beneath the canopy. The Amazon continues operating according to rhythms older than modern history itself. Some things there may disappear. Some may survive. Some may adapt in ways humans cannot yet predict. And hidden beneath the darkness tonight, inside the largest rainforest on Earth, the future is already unfolding quietly among the trees. Thanks for joining me on tonight's journey through the Amazon. If you enjoyed this relaxing documentary, don't forget to subscribe to Sleepy Secrets and leave a comment below telling me what topic you'd like me to explore next. Wishing you a peaceful night, good luck, and sweet dreams tonight.